Hey guys, I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to our executive Q&A panel. I've got four of my favorite and most talented leaders with me today. Let me introduce our panel. I'm going to introduce you guys together. Pastor Matt and Tammy Brown, the founders of Sandals Church. Guys, thank you for being here. We're grateful for you. Melody Workman, our executive director of Story and Experience, is here. Thank you, Melody. And Brian Chillette, our Executive Director of Network Services. Brian, thanks for being here, my friend.
Brian
Brian the Brain.
Brian the Brain.
Guys, I'm so excited to just unpack what everyone has learned at the conference. We've got some great questions. Let's just dive right in. I want to start with you, Pastor Matt. You were talking to your younger self,
right.
What you wished you knew. So you spoke about the secrets to great leadership that you wished you knew when you were a younger leader. Why should younger leaders learn from what you had to share in your message?
Yeah, I think for all young leaders, your appetite is always well beyond your level of integrity. And I just didn't realize that. I think that, when you're a young leader, you're aspiring to do great things, and that's a God-given gift, but your appetite is so far beyond your relationship with God, your relationship to yourself, and there's just so much that you don't know about yourself, and especially as a 3 on the Enneagram, I'm chasing, this limited amount of time that I have to accomplish the things that I feel like I want to accomplish. And I always felt like I'm behind. I'm behind. I'm just not accomplishing what God wants me to accomplish. And what I failed to realize is that the process is part of what God wants to work inside of me. And I think especially as a Christian leader, we think of our life in terms of what we do for others, but we fail to think of what God wants to do inside of us. Yep. And I just think that younger leaders need to really, really be aware of, what's going on in my life and where are the weaknesses that I need to work on. So when I was coming up in leadership, everything was focus on your strengths, ignore your weaknesses, hire. I can't tell you, I heard Bill Hybels say this, Rick Warren say this. I heard, the 10 irrefutable laws of leadership, and you just focus on your strengths. So we had a whole generation that ignored their weaknesses, and I watched all of these leaders just fall apart, and it was devastating. And I think the thing that is just so hard to embrace is that, I have this great calling, I have this great gifting. I even think on my life that it's been proven over time there's an anointing. But when you look at the Bible and you look at the characters who are gifted, who are great and have anointing, they're great flaws. Mm. And you look at Abraham, who lies about Sarah being his wife twice. You look at David make multiple mistakes twice. And so you just have to understand that as a young leader, your decisions can be catastrophic. And I think the best example of this is Rehoboam in the Old Testament. So it goes David, Solomon, Rehoboam. And so David is the conqueror, Solomon's the wise, and then Rehoboam, he becomes king, and the people of Israel say, your dad was hard on us. We want grace, and if you give us some grace and you relax, we'll serve you. And so he goes and he listens to his younger friends, and he doesn't listen to the older wise men of Israel, and his decision is catastrophic. And so that's the thing as a leader is, you can make a catastrophic decision because you believe in yourself and you surround yourself with a lot of other ignorance. And that's what Rehoboam did, is he had collective ignorance around himself. And they said, you need to show these people that you're stronger than your dad, you're tougher than your dad. Well, the truth is, as a young leader, you are nowhere near to what you need to be or what you're called to be. And Rehoboam should have listened to the elders in his community, and he lost his kingdom day one. Mm. And I've watched great pastors, great leaders, great people, they lose everything. Everything falls apart because there's this glaring weakness. And so for Rehoboam, it was pride and the counsel that he surrounded himself with. And I've always struggled getting mentors in my life, getting people in my life that will speak into my life. And, I think that what I would have done is run sooner to counsel, and you got to find somebody that wants to invest in you, that isn't intimidated by you, because unfortunately, in leadership, people are competitive. You would hope that that's not in Christianity, but it is, and so you have to find somebody that just really loves your giftedness. And Tammy and I both, we want to be that for young leaders. We see them; they're younger leaders that I see that are as talented or more talented than me, and one day they're going to replace me, which is okay. That's the way it goes, and I'm only required to run my length of the event. And I just would say again, so many leaders, if you have a marriage problem, deal with that, or because your marriage or ruin your ministry. It just can blow up. And thank God gave me my wife that was willing to challenge. And Tammy is like in the Civil War, Stonewall Jackson, like I am not moving, I am not, I am not.
I would think that's a compliment.
Well, yeah, I mean, because, no matter how many times the Union soldiers came out with overwhelming force, Stonewall Jackson said, I am not moving. And I'm a stronger, louder, leader than Tammy, but she just said, I'm not going to move from here, and these weaknesses must change. And I think that being willing to understand that I had real growth in my marriage as a father, real integrity issues early on, helped catapult me into the leader that I am today. And I would just say this: a lot of leaders that I see struggle married a partner who doesn't challenge, who doesn't say, okay, a lot of wives or even husbands feel like their job is just to support. Well, your job as a Christian leader and a Christian couple is also to follow God. And so Tammy's first loyalty is to God, and specifically, I'm called to follow him. And so she's got to be loyal to God so that I can become, the husband, the leader, and the person that I need to be. And I just would say this: don't be afraid to really look at your weaknesses and say, this is my problem. And it takes a lot of courage to look a fellow leader in the face and say, I preached on sexual purity this week and I looked at porn.
Yeah.
I talked about being grace-filled and I yelled at my wife. I challenge people to tithe and I don't. Hypocrisy knows no bounds in terms of leadership. And we see this all the time where we see leaders, Jesus says, don't lead like the Gentiles do. Nancy Pelosi says, absolutely wear a mask. She doesn't. That's not what we can do as leaders. We have to, if you believe in masks, you need to wear a mask, and you need to do that. And so if you believe drinking is wrong as a Christian leader, then you better not drink. I can't tell you how many Christian leaders we've met, they tell their church not to drink, but they drink. And that's a problem. And at the end, that's going to get you. And don't be afraid of weakness. I would say embrace it. God knows you're not perfect, and he called you anyways. Yeah. And one of my favorite lines, and I'll stop, is when Jesus calls Peter. Peter says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." What Peter is saying is, I am nowhere near good enough to follow you. Well, none of us are. And yet, Jesus says, Peter, follow me and I will make you a fisher of men. I'm going to teach you how to care about people and catch people and save people. And Jesus has so much grace for Peter. As he falls, he fails, he messes up, he says the wrong thing, does the wrong thing. And ultimately, Peter becomes the great orator for Jesus. And so, God's not afraid of your weaknesses. The only thing you need to be afraid of is not being aware of those. And that's how you move forward. And so I just can't emphasize enough, the more talented you are, the more essential it is that you understand your weaknesses. And especially in today's climate, there are no secrets anymore. There are not. Charles Spurgeon would not make it today. Okay? A.W. Tozer would not make it today. Some of your favorite missionaries would not make it today because their lives were extraordinarily inconsistent in one area or another, and all of that gets exposed. There's a cell phone everywhere. There's information everywhere. Your own staff, your own friends, sometimes your own family. I think about Melania Trump talking with a best friend on the phone, and that conversation is being recorded. And as a leader, you just have to know, look, I have to deal with these issues and these feelings. And here's the thing is, you want to work that stuff out before you're in the spotlight. I think the spotlight is a horrible place to work out weakness. So
that's great. Yeah, I love that. My big takeaway from what you just shared is I need to challenge my wife more.
Yeah,
so
that's not what I said.
Is that? Oh, okay. That wasn't.
That wasn't what I heard. I didn't hear that at all.
Yeah. All right. It's not what I heard. But I think that the big idea that I heard is really get real about your weakness and then get to work on it.
Yeah.
Especially as a young leader, it applies to all of us, no matter how old we are. That's great. That's great. All right, let's go to our next question for Tammy. We are going to talk about self-discovery, right? That's our next question. Tammy, you want to just talk about self-discovery and why every leader should be on a self-discovery journey to better understand how God has made them, both the good things about them and the not so good things.
Here's the thing about self-discovery is just that you can only try or pretend to be something you're not for so long. Like, it is going to catch up with you. And so I think what I would say for myself in leadership, when I finally really spent some time focusing on understanding who I was, how I'm wired, I wasn't surprised. You know, we know how we're wired. We know what motivates us. Sometimes we don't have the language for it, and so we can spin. When I started getting real about the way that I'm wired, the way fear really plays a role in my life as a 6 on the Enneagram, the way I think about everything that could go wrong, the way I question people, I could look back in my life. Almost every conflict, every failure, every area trial for me was wrapped up in that in some way, where fear, questioning, assuming the worst kind of got the best of me. So I wasn't shocked. But once I discovered that, and it was sort of out of me with a language and a framework for it, I was better prepared to deal with it. And I didn't have to try to pretend it wasn't there anymore. And I think self-discovery, especially for leaders, is so key. Like Matt talked about, know your weaknesses. I think a lot of leaders are so afraid to say they have a weakness, but that weakness is no secret to anyone that's ever around you. So you're the only one who thinks it's a secret. They're experiencing you that way. You know, at Sandals Church, we use the language so much, you know this. How are you being experienced by others? That weakness is coming out. And so you lose total credibility if you're unaware of your weaknesses. And again, you're the only one who thinks no one knows by hiding it. We get the upper hand on it when we get real about it, and we can go, you know what, I can be this way, but I also bring this. That's the other thing about self-discovery that I think is so important is I spend a lot of time, a lot of leaders I know spend a lot of time looking at the strengths of other good leaders. I'm never going to be the leader that Matt is because we're wired so differently. He's more of a bold, outspoken leader. I'm more of a quiet, gentler, planner kind of a leader. And I think that when we can recognize, no, my way matters too, we stop with the sideways energy of trying to be all the things that we're not and stepping into, but here's what I am. You know, it takes all the kinds. I say that all the different ways of leading really is like this mosaic of humanity that God made. And where I'm weak, Matt's strong. Where Matt's strong, I'm weak. And that's great because it's all covered. And so self-discovery really is, I think, where freedom is found. And once all those that sideways energy gets minimized, I think that's when whatever you want to achieve is unstoppable.
And I think, you know, two things. I think that I'm the leader who says we're taking the hill. Come hell or high water, we're taking the hill, let's go, let's do this. I don't always have a plan, right?
And I'm like, to take the hill, we're gonna need A, B, C, and D.
And so she helps me work out the plan. And what I would say in self-discovery is don't be afraid of what you find. So God's never gonna call you, because I think a lot of us as leaders, like we wish, oh God, I really wish I could do that, or I could be that. And you spend all of this time grieving and moaning what you don't have, rather than really focusing on what you do have, and use that gift.
That's the benefit of it, is you don't have to be embarrassed that you have a weakness. Everybody has it. And the people that aren't acknowledging that, they're not being real. But everyone who knows them knows it's real.
For sure.
And the same point, you don't have to spend so much energy lamenting on what you're not. You can really hone in and focus on the development of what you are, knowing that that's necessary, and then not everybody has that. You know, we think that the way that we lead or the way that we're gifted just comes easy to everyone because it comes easy to you. And it's just not true. You know, I'm a super hyper planner, a detail-oriented person, and to me, I'm like, yeah, of course, because that's the way I'm wired. It's how I'm built. And there's so many people that's not their thing, though, but their thing is not my thing. And so together, we make it all happen, and we make the world a better place when we live in our strength, but also acknowledge and understand that our weaknesses, you know, they're going to affect it if we're not real with them.
Yeah, that's great. I would say to all of our leaders watching right now, you will live your fullest, richest life where you have the greatest impact for the kingdom and on other people when you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you're real about both of those things. You'll have the best life and have the greatest impact. So this journey of self-discovery is incredibly important, not just for young leaders, but we encounter leaders that are our age, let's say, or even older, who really aren't sure about their strengths and definitely are not clear about their weaknesses. Last thing I would say to leaders is it's your job to create an environment of safety if you're going to encourage people to go on a self-discovery
Leaders
journey.
lead, and they lead in showing others how to acknowledge both their strength and their weakness.
Yep, that's great. All right, let's kick it over to Melody. Your talk on influence was great. You have a great ability to influence others. I think God has given you that ability. Talk to our audience about the secret to gaining influence. I think everybody wants it. And talk to those that want more influence, that don't have it. They think they should. I should have a bigger job. I should have more title, more pay. I should have got that promotion. And they're maybe frustrated with their church or their business or organization that they're working for. Help leaders understand how to become an influencer.
I think it's easy to sort of look at, maybe a group like this or another group and just think it's always been this way. And yeah, there was a journey for each of us and leaders everywhere to get to where we are or where they are. So the first thing I would say is no one is entitled to influence. Influence has to be earned, and it's based on trust. So one of the things that I talked about in my one talk was the big idea was to learn your leaders. You want to gain influence, and where I see some young leaders sort of make a misstep is they spend more time generating ideas than gaining influence. So their thought is, I have a great idea, therefore I'm entitled to a seat at the table or to influence. But not understanding that since influence is based on trust, you don't a lot of times get to share your ideas until you've gained the influence. So you need to spend more time there first. And the other part of that is there were a lot of painful lessons I had to learn in this journey of leadership. And I wouldn't want to go back, to some of those days. And yet God wasn't wasting my waiting. My waiting was not wasted. There were things he was teaching me during that refining where I really wanted more. I was raising my hand. I was asking for more. I was trying to do it with humility. And there were there was a lot of closed doors and a lot of exclusion and different things. But God was very present with me in that. And so my encouragement to those who are in that season of waiting is just know it's not being wasted. And to make yourself open to what God is teaching you because he's refining you. I mean, that's what 1 Peter 1:7 talks about. The refiner's fire can make you come out as gold, proven pure as gold. And so, but you have to be willing to walk through seasons of waiting. You have to be willing to walk through seasons of disappointment, not getting picked, not getting chosen, feeling overlooked. All of those things that can feel discouraging and disillusioning, God's using those. He's not wasting that. So to continue to pray and surrender and make yourself available, but realize at the end of the day, trust is the foundation to gaining influence. You have to be a trustworthy person, a person full of integrity, and your leaders have to know that they can entrust information and ideas and feedback and all of those things to you that make you a trustworthy person, that sort of brings you into the circle that you desire. You can't really overlook your own personal integrity and replace that with great ideas or vision or whatever, or passion. You have to be yourself a trustworthy person to gain influence with others.
So good, so good.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So here's what I would say about Melody specifically is, she got told so often no, either A, because you're a woman, or B, because of, I think just an organization that didn't aspire to leadership. And I'm so grateful that they all said no, because that made you who you are today. And had she not had to work through those things, we're going to miss out on just this gem of leadership. And I would say two things. If you're in an organization that doesn't value you because of your gender, doesn't value you because of your position, and there just are organizations. Tammy and I were in an organization where I said, this is 24 years ago, imagine a young Matt Brown in your church, and I said, hey, we want to start a young adult service. And the pastor looked at me and said, I don't think that's your gift. And so we left. We left and we started the largest young adult ministry.
You didn't stay and complain and divide the church?
No, man. You have a call. You have a call, and we left and we went quietly. There's a great book called 3 Kings I would encourage every leader to read on how to leave. But find an organization where either you can lead, and there's a lot of pain in that, jumping out too soon, which we did, or like Melody, come to an organization that values leadership. And Melody you were not hired at Sandals. We hired your husband. And then we're like, who's this? She's
like,
what's this over here? And this is incredible. And then you and I started to meet. And so find an organization that values leadership, that builds great teams, and get a part of that. Because I think, Melody needs all of the heartache of your life, which I apologize for, but I think it made you great. And then Melody needs an organization like Sandals that goes, I see you, and you're incredible, and we want to give you an opportunity. And I'll just tell you, Melody's one of the greatest leaders in our church, and I just am so thrilled to have her. But I just think there's a lot of leaders, especially female leaders in church, where maybe they're not being seen.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem. So.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, Dan, like just in this question of, how do you gain influence? Here's what I would say. I see a lot of young leaders really want influence, but they don't want the burden that accompanies it. Like, I want a seat at the table and I want my ideas made, but I don't want the criticism, I don't want the weight, I don't want the problem, and you just don't get one without the other.
Yeah.
And so to really know what you're asking for when you want a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've tried to give up a seat at the table a time or two.
Keep giving it back
because
to
there's
you.
times I am like, here's the seat. But it's true, and I think that's a mistake or a fantasy even about leadership that I see so many leaders have, is just that you can have one without the other, and it's just the position is a weight of both. It's all of the good parts and all of the getting to do great things, and it's a lot of heavy lifting as well.
Yeah, and I would just say, everybody sitting up here, it doesn't matter if they're on vacation, it doesn't matter what you guys are doing. If I have a question, I'm calling you, I'm texting you. Poor Brian probably wakes up in the morning to my text, he goes to bed to my
Every
text.
day.
Melody's on vacation, we're on the phone, hey, what about this? Tammy has to sleep next to me, so it's constant. but you and I,
We don't sleep together.
No, we don't sleep together. But you need to know that's what it requires. That's what it requires. And I think that you just need to understand the weight and mantle of leadership. And I don't want to be pro-Trump versus Biden, but I want you to listen to these words that Trump said. Trump said, I'd love to be in a basement. I thought that was one of the most profound leadership moments, but I don't get to. I had to have COVID and still be the president. I have to go out and do these things. I have to live my life with these struggles. And even if you're for Biden, you have to know that's a leadership statement. I don't get to not die because I'm the leader in the midst of this pandemic, and I have to do what I have to do. And that's what these people have to do. Is you don't get to go in a basement.
We're rarely off.
Yeah, no. And I mean, the better team you build, I think the more time you get off. But you just have to understand that. But Melody, Brian, Tammy, and Dan's life, it's more challenging and more difficult. Yeah, you get to sit at the table, but sometimes that means you're not sleeping at night because you're like, well, okay, what's going on here? And I don't think leaders think about that enough.
For sure. Yeah, I want to close this out with two thoughts, especially for our young leaders. And the first is that the foundation for influence is trust. And so if you're struggling with not having the influence you want where you are, I want you to think about, what am I doing to build trust? Because the answer is probably in there. And then the second thing that you said, we're going to put a pop-up quote on the screen right now, Tyler, on this. I'm just kidding, Tyler. We're not going to do that. But this is great, what Melody said. God doesn't waste the waiting. And so when you don't have the influence that you want, there's a good chance that God is doing something in the waiting in you, and it's going to throw back to the first question. It's likely that he's refining your character to what you talked about. So if you're struggling with influence, just know that God's probably doing something in you, and if it's really a problem and you think you're in the wrong place, please don't stay, complain, and divide. It's probably time for you to move on and find a place that will recognize you for where you're at. All right, let's head over to Mr. Brian Shillette. Brian, if you haven't heard, there's heartache in every pivot, all right? That's what Brian's talk was about. Talk to us about what is and what causes heartache inside of a pivot.
Sure, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this over the last few months in particular. A pivot by nature is like a directional change, as we all know, like not a little change, not an adjustment, but kind of a directional change. And inevitably, when we're in a directional change, we begin to at times feel like, hey, my thing and the organization's thing are suddenly less aligned. Like, It's the teacher who has always taught in a classroom, or the waiter who's always served in a restaurant. It's the worship leader who has always led in front of a room full of people. They're suddenly feeling like, hey, this thing that I do and the thing that we're allowed to do or that we need to do or that we want to do, like they're not connected anymore. Suddenly they're disconnected. And I think it begins to challenge our identity. Like, this is my calling, this is who I am, this is what I do.
That's good.
What do I do now that we can't do what I do? You know, and maybe they want to move, they want to change, but they begin to feel like, you know, I don't know if I can. Like, I don't know if I can. As much as I might want to, I don't know how to. Maybe it begins to feel like, hey, maybe my career's at stake, maybe my job's at stake, maybe my family's at risk, and all of a sudden a shame begins to enter in because, hey, I really need to make this change, and I'm not sure if I know how to. And that burden's been weighing on me just a lot in the last handful of months because I've begun to see it just in COVID. Like, we're making these drastic changes, and as leaders, a lot of the time, we see the opportunity. Like, my first reaction with COVID was excitement. Like, things are going to change. There's going to be all new winners. There's going to be all new losers. Like, let's go. So sometimes it's that opportunity that's exciting. Sometimes it's, hey, we got to pivot or die. Like, we're moving, and we all carry the weight of that. Like, hey, we can go at a pace, but it needs to be at least the pace of survival, if not more. But yeah, as leaders, we see that opportunity, we see that need to change and pivot, but if in the middle of that we push right through that heartache, the reality is it lives under the surface, and if we don't re-win that heart, we will not be able to point the energy of the team towards the challenges that we're facing and the moves that we need to make. So my encouragement to leaders is to know that it exists. Whether you see it or not, whether you see symptoms of it or not, it's there under the surface. That heartache is there. And there's specific things we can do to begin to re-win the heart, you know, so that we can get all the energy headed in the right direction. Just a couple of those things real quick. One thing we can do is help the team remember the higher goal. Like, hey, that worship leader, God will always call us to lead his people in worship. There is always a place for a worship leader. It just might look different. It may not be in a room full of people for a while. Come back up to the higher goal. What is the higher calling? It's number one, that inspires people to that thing we actually exist to do, which is reach people. And number two, I would say experiment together. You know, experimenting helps everyone understand none of us have the answer. Like, we're all figuring this out together. It's common ground. I don't have to be ashamed anymore. I don't have to feel like an outsider because I don't know if I can make the change anymore. And I think those two things together can really like help engage the team so that you can kind of re-win the heart and get everybody's energy and excitement headed back towards the mission and the goal of your organization, whatever it is you're doing.
I would say really quickly, just to follow up on that, right in the middle of COVID, I was on the phone with one of the worship leaders at Sandals Church, and they were weeping. Just, this is really hard. I don't know if I can. And I think one of the lessons I learned as I was trying to move people in the pivot, we have to pivot, we've got to move, we've got to do things differently. That conversation was gave me a heightened awareness of how difficult it is, and to be available and open to the people on my team who are like, I want to go, I'm all in, I'm 100%, I'm on board. This is just really hard. I'm doubting myself, and this is an anointed worship leader, you know, who God's using in major, masterful ways. So it gave me just an awareness of, as we're pivoting and as we're moving, as we're leading people in a new direction, to just have sensitivity to your team, to be available for them, to kind of walk them through the change, not to overlook that as you're trying to, you know, herd sheep, what it feels like sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. You know, a lot of what Brian was talking about is change management, and I would encourage church leaders, especially that are watching, to learn change management, because when church, generally speaking, church people don't like change, is how I would say it. And so if you as a leader don't know how to lead people through change and understand the different feelings and emotions that they go through and how to move people through a process, I would encourage you to study change management, and that's a great opportunity for you to sign up for Rogo School, to be honest with you. That's a place where we teach that. All right, let's pivot back to PMB. You talked earlier about knowing your weakness. You talked about the importance of leaders knowing their weakness. When you were starting out as a young leader planting Sandals Church 24 years ago, reflecting back, if you're looking back, what was your greatest weakness and what were the implications of that weakness? And I'm asking that question especially for our young church planters that are watching, that are likely struggling, because church planting, is it easy or is it hard?
Oh, it's miserable.
Yeah.
I would never plant a church again unless Jesus Christ himself was standing right there and he's like, you're going to plant another church. I mean, it was so terrible. There were, within our first year, there was a service where she didn't even attend, and I was preaching to 3 people. 3 people, and in the middle of my sermon, this guy named Chris raises his hand, and he has a question, not about my sermon. It was awful. It was terrible. And we pivoted, and we went from Sunday morning to Sunday night. That was pivotal in the history of Sandals Church because young people could attend at night and were awake. That was one of the best decisions we made early on. But what I would say is this. My weakness, and here's the thing as a young leader, every single young leader, listen to me, your weakness is leadership. That is your weakness. You are a disaster, and you don't know it yet. You don't know how to lead. You don't know how to inspire. You don't know how to have integrity. I mean, all of these things will be learned over time. And so what I would say is treasure your mistakes as much as your victories, because you got to go back and go, okay, what do I need to do different? And so in my talk, I talked about we fired, people the wrong way. We're trying to get better, but it just never seems to go right. And what I try to do is learn from that and say, okay, how do I learn from this the next step? And really, really get to the place where I don't even like using the word fire. It's just, look, we're going in different ways, and I'm going to help you go your way. But this is a decision that I'm making. And so I would just say, you're not the leader you need to be. You're not the leader yet that God's called you to be. And the way that God's going to get you there is, look at the life of Moses. It's through 40 years of suck, right? It's just like, we're going to get you there. And if you're a young leader, quit trying to jump over these leaders who are ahead of you and learn what you can from them, because it's just heartache, and learn those lessons. But just know you're not who you need to be. And so many young leaders, right, their sermons are so far beyond where they are. Like with worship leaders, yeah, you can sing, but are you even a Christian? I mean, have you ever led, children? I mean, you can't do any of this. And so oftentimes in the church, we confuse talent with leadership. And those are 2 different things. And so you have talented people, but they're not yet leaders. And so I just think, looking back, and surround yourself with people that are willing to understand they're not the leader they need to be. I remember early on, we took a Strengths Quest test, and one of my key leaders he's like, I got them all. I mean, I was like, and I looked at him and I was like, oh, you're your own church. Why are you even here? I'm not kidding you. There were 24 different giftings that you could have, and he's telling me, I have every one. And what that means is you probably don't have anyone at this current moment. And so surround yourself with humble people that want to serve you, that understand their weaknesses. And I had a team early on that saw my weaknesses. They were very aware because they were easy to spot. You don't all need to nod. But what they couldn't see, it's not hard to see someone else's weakness. Sure. It's hard to see your own and to look at yourself. And I just had a team that they just could not look at themselves. I had a guy, this is classic Sandals. There's a mountain maybe a few miles from here, has a gigantic M on it. And one of my leaders said that the Lord told me that M stands for millions. I was like, I thought it stood for Moreno Valley. He's like, it stood for millions, and God's going to use me to reach millions. Well, he's working for me, so he had to get out of here because I was holding him back. He started his own church. It failed. He lost his marriage. His kids, his family's a disaster. And it's like his weakness, right? Can you imagine what it is? Pride. It's like, come on, dude. You're going to reach millions? Well, why don't we start off with 10? And in that same week, we had a decision where he told me he needed a full-time assistant because he was overwhelmed with paperwork. And we sat down, how many phone calls do you have? 3 for the week. 3 for the week. And so millions, and you can't make 3 phone calls. So you got to understand, okay, I've got these problems. And when you start out, you're automatically arrogant. I mean, you wouldn't plant a church if you didn't think you were going to. Who plants it? Like, yeah, we're going to fail. This is going to be terrible. So you're arrogant, and you believe you're going to do things. And, you know, some of that you just can't help because you're a young leader, but you have to be willing to say, okay, I've got this passion, I've got this drive, but what are the things that are holding me back, and what are the things that I need to look at, because some of them are catastrophic. Pride, anger. You know, I've watched you know, pastors fall because of their marriage, and it wasn't sexual failure outside the marriage. They weren't intimate for years inside the marriage, and you're like, okay, you didn't think that was a problem? I've seen people, their temper, their anger, the way that they communicate. I'm a leader that's really chill until I'm not, and then I blow.
Not so chill.
Then I blow my gasket, and that's catastrophic, right? So Moses hits the rock with the stick, and God says, you're not going in the land. And so you got to learn to process your anger and communicate your frustration. And so that's what I would say. Go back and talk to my key weakness is I waited until I was angry to confront. That's not the fruit of the Spirit. Anger is not a fruit of the Spirit. Love is. So I got to confront in love, and that's harder because I might lose a friendship, I might lose an employee, I might lose a church member, I might lose a client. And you say, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. This behavior is not acceptable, but I love you. Speak the truth in love, Paul says, but you got to speak the truth. And most of us wait until we can't take it anymore. We've had enough, and we snap. And now the issue is my sin as a leader. And I just didn't know how to do that. So I would wait for the whole group to agree with me to make the call, which never works. The other thing I did, oh my gosh, I would hire somebody to deal with the problem, and it's not you. I can't deal with you, so I'm going to ask you, and that doesn't work. Like if you're the strongest leader on your team and you can't deal with a person, you cannot hire somebody to deal with that. You have to deal with that person. And what I would say is, I put my arm around Matt Brown. I would say they're not the problem. You are. You are. And I say this all the time to leaders. Your staff is not your problem. Your finances are not your problem. No one else. You are your problem. And if your team isn't growing, if your church isn't growing, it's you. It's always you. And when I look back to when Sandals Church struggled the most, it's because I failed to realize I have to grow. And growth is painful. You know, our son is growing. You know, we all have kids that are growing, and it hurts. And a lot of us have forgotten about that. You know, my son would just ice his knees, and, you know, he can't sleep at night because he's growing. And if you're not hurting, you're not growing. And so you have to say, okay, Lord, where do you want to take me to the next step? And it's just so painful. And I just really believed if I can just get everybody else to do their crap, we'll be great. But I have to deal with my stuff, and I have to make the hard call. And I just tell you, it's not easy.
That's great. That's great. All right, Tammy, let's talk a little bit about the shadow side of our giftedness. So by God's grace, we're all gifted. What is our greatest strengths is oftentimes our greatest weakness. Talk to us about that. What do leaders need to know about the shadow side of their giftedness?
Well, I think, like, Matt, you just set me up so perfectly to answer this, but you said, I'm the problem. I think we are our best asset in our gifting and our worst disaster in our weakness. And to pretend that both don't exist is exactly where the whole house of cards will come down. And that's the thing about the shadow side of things is, for me, my shadow side is fear. I'm afraid of everything, which means I'll avoid things. You know, for different, if lying or success, if success, like for the 3 on the Enneagram, that's your gifting, and it is a gift because we need people who see where we can go and want to get us there. When people like me would be like, I don't want to go there, we've never been, we don't know what's there, we don't know what's waiting for us to tear us up. You know, like, we need that. But also, if success is your strength, the shadow side is avoiding failure and lying. So to avoid failure, you might avoid doing what's right because it might seem like a failure. Like when you talked about firing people, I know that feels like a failure to have to say this isn't working. So we would avoid it in those early days. That's the shadow side of not being able to lead in your strength. And we all have it. So, you know, is pride or is anger your shadow side? You know, if you want things done right, well, that's unrealistic in life because life is messy. I mean, if we've learned anything this year, it's that things aren't always going to get done perfect and right. And that makes you mad because you can't control everybody, because some people don't care if it's right. They want it to be fun, or they don't want it to happen at all, or they want it peaceful, you know? So, or is it you just want to help and be there for people? then your passive aggressive is going to make no one, they don't even want your help, they don't want you, you know? The achiever, you know, do you just want success? And you're going to lie because not everything is a win every day, all day long. So then you lose credibility.
You're talking a lot about the threes here. I noticed. Do you notice?
Sitting with two threes.
Okay.
Well, but I would even say, you know, because I feel like I over complimented Trump. Trump's greatest weakness is his strength, right? So he can't ever say, "Yeah, I should have done that different."
Right.
And it's just like, come on, bro. Like, you wouldn't, like, knowing what we know now, you wouldn't have done COVID differently. Like, to me, that's a home run. Like, I know we all would have done things differently. And so you can be an incredibly strong leader, and you're not aware of how your arrogance. Like, you can't even say, of course I would have done.
Like here's what I would say. I would say encourage every leader. We've tried to make it part of our culture here at Sandals Church. I would ask some key people that you work with, can you let me know how you experienced me?
Yeah, it's a great question.
I think we'll all be, because those things, people are experiencing them, whether they're telling us that or not. You know, and so we want to operate in our strengths. And what I want leaders to know is that by identifying, acknowledging, and then giving attention to the development of our weakness, that will actually be one of your best strengths.
That's great. So I think that's a great tool and takeaway from what Tammy shared for all of you. And this isn't just for people that work in churches, but for people that work in corporate America. It does for everybody. The tool is this question that you have to ask other people, how did you experience me? Especially if you're under duress. You're in a meeting, things get hot. You can go back after the meeting and ask people, hey, how did you experience me in the midst of that difficult situation? So
and it doesn't mean that you don't do the hard work. It just means you might need to tend to your approach and your strategy.
Tend to your approach. That's great. All right, Melody, let's talk about the punch and hug. All right, this is a leadership principle that knows how much and when to apply strength and when to apply gentleness. What would you say to strong leaders out there? So these are people that are wired by God to be strong. What would you say to them that have no problem bringing the punch, but they struggle with bringing the gentleness? And some of this is in approach, as Tammy just mentioned. How can you help leaders that lack self-awareness around being a little too strong at the wrong time? Because it can be very damaging inside of relationships and inside of an organization if the strong person is always the loudest, is always running people over. The church and businesses need strong people, but we also need them to be gentle. So talk to folks that are wired to be strong. How can you help them?
Yeah, this has been a challenging lesson for me. I feel like I'm good with the punch. So God, I feel like, has grown me with the hug, and some of that's from my own journey of the hard things I've gone through that have made me more sensitive. But I would say to strong leaders, the best leader is not the emotional leader, but the empathetic leader. So leaning into empathy as you lead people helps you deliver the punch hug, because the goal is to get to the hug. But you can't just hug. You know, another thing I'll say is I think great leaders are rubbing people on the back figuratively and kicking them in the butt at the same time. You're not just kicking people in the butt, and you're not just rubbing them on the back. You know, that's the encouraging and the challenging happening at the same time.
The kick and rub.
The kick and rub, sure. Punch and hug, kick and rub, whatever.
Brian, you're up next. Metaphor.
But the truth is, you know, everyone on this panel, with the exception of Brian, and I don't want to see this in the future, but has had a challenging conversation with me. A punch and hug conversation with me. And it's
busy
made
at noon, right?
it's made me better. It's grown me. And when I sit in those hard conversations, what I wish, and sometimes I do say to the person, is I want you to look back 6 months, a year from now, and remember this as being a refining conversation in your life. I'm not against you, I'm for you. And because I'm for you, I need to challenge you on these things. And I think great leaders do the same thing. You know, I'll sit down with, I've told everyone, you have an open invitation to speak into my life at any time. Do you see a blind spot in me? I don't think any leader should ever get to the point where they think they've arrived, to where they're just always giving the hard conversations and not receiving them. But back to the Enneagram, one of the most helpful things I've learned as an Enneagram 8, it's very strong and driven and challenging, and let's just talk about what's wrong in the room and let me just say what needs to be said. When they're healthy, they go to the 2, which is a nurturer. And that is my internal kind of like gauge on where I'm at in a conversation, is if I'm moving towards being nurturing or if I'm just plowing over and bulldozing and trying to destroy. So that has helped me in my self-awareness. And I think strong leaders, again, if you're thinking less about your emotions, which in a hard conversation, you're frustrated with someone a lot of times, maybe they're underperforming, maybe they've disappointed you or not come through, and you can get really high on your emotions. If you can learn to sort of settle that and lean into empathy for that person, it makes it better for what you say and how they experience and receive what you say.
That's great.
Yeah, I would say this, that kryptonite is to Superman what a lack of self-awareness is to any leader.
There you go.
So I don't care how strong you are, Superman is completely incapacitated by kryptonite. Self-awareness will incapacitate will incapacitate any great leader. And I have seen it, we have seen it, we have watched dynamic leaders come through Sandals over the years and just go off a cliff because they're either unable or unwilling to see themselves.
Yeah, so good, so helpful. Brian, let's talk about pivot. Organizations must pivot right now with COVID. Everyone is impacted by COVID. You talked about a shift organizations need to make right now from a culture of refining excellence, meaning making things maybe a little bit better each time, to experimenting towards innovation. Can you give us an example of what you mean by that shift from refining excellence to experimenting towards innovation?
Sure, yeah, I actually got a great example just this week talking to a friend. His family owns restaurants. So you can imagine, tough space in the last handful of months. They own very high-end restaurants. So part of their lore is that one time they turned away Beyonce because she didn't have a reservation. So that's, excellence is in their DNA. They're kind of up there a bit. And he was telling me just this week that restaurants usually operate at like an 8 to 10% profit margin.
Wow.
But over the last handful of months, they've been operating at 33%. They've been having the best season they have ever had in the restaurant. And he was telling me why. He said, because every little bit of opportunity they had, they took it. They took every inch they could get. If they could have an outdoor patio, they found a way to have an outdoor patio. If they could do margaritas curbside, they're doing margaritas curbside.
That's a win.
Whatever it was.
Yeah, we're not doing that, by the way. We're not doing that.
No.
I was there.
I think that might increase our leadership.
I was there. I can validate. They were doing. Oh no. But yeah, every little bit that they could do, they tried. They did it. They were experimenting. They're trying to innovate. What's the new thing we can do to meet the new market? And the opposite of that is if they're sitting around talking about what's the best host language as we engage new guests that walk through the door. It's like, hey, that's okay. That's a world where you're back in refining excellence. You're perfecting the thing you've always done. It's natural as organizations grow, they get kind of into their patterns and their routines. Hey, we figured out 85% of what we do. We're making some money. We kind of know what we're doing. We've experienced some success. Hey, let's just, we're tweaking, we're incremental improvement. The challenge right now, though, is that's just not enough. When the world is moving the way that it is, refining those things towards just making it perfect just isn't enough anymore.
Yeah.
You've got to move to this posture, really, of experimenting in big ways. Maybe it's experimenting in little ways, but finding big innovation that gets you towards what the market world might call a new product market fit. The market is moving and changing, and in a season like that, with the kind of momentum that we've got, so much is moving and changing. We'll see big new winners and losers in the next year. And the reality is, even none of us know exactly what church will look like in a year from now, or 2 years from now. But what we can do is we can begin experimenting, we can begin innovating, we can begin rediscovering what that looks like over the coming months. And that doesn't come from refining excellence. It doesn't come from spending our time just incrementally improving the thing we've always done.
Yeah.
And so if you're a leader out there and you're trying to figure out what do I do, you've got to change postures. You've got to change postures to how do we experiment how do we experiment to innovate so we can find the new thing? Otherwise, you're over here improving the language of your hosts at a time when there's no one coming to your restaurant.
Yeah, that's great.
And it kind of just,
That's
doesn't get you there.
one of the best things this year is going out to businesses, to local restaurants, everything that we've seen. People have been desperate, so they have new innovation. Some of this, I'm like, we should have been doing this forever. Like, I just think it's been so incredible to see what people have come up with.
And they'll have,
And it's better.
Yeah.
It's better in a time that was worse. And you're seeing that, but with leaders who said, I'm going to experiment, we're going to experiment. We have to figure out how to stay afloat in some new ways in a new world. And I think that not everyone, because some is falling apart because it can't work, but some that we won't see in a year from now exist at all. They're the ones who are going, man, we can't do what we were doing.
Yeah.
We can't do what we were doing.
Yep.
right.
And I think even for us here, like, Easter for a church is a big deal, right? It's the service of the year where everyone will come to the church. Now we can't come to church on Easter. And we all had to get in a room and go, how do we make Easter happen? How can we still engage? And we had our biggest numbers we've ever had through that pivot. And so I think that experimentation is so key.
Yeah, and
I've loved it.
And
I've
some of
loved
these
watching
things will last forever.
Yeah.
Even as church reopens, restaurants reopen, you might find whole new revenue streams that last forever.
I really hope the sanitizing of carts places.
That sticks.
And that kind of, I hope that one sticks.
Yeah, that'd be a good one.
Like, why haven't we been doing that forever?
Yeah. So big takeaway, I think, for all of our business leaders and church leaders is to go back, talk with your teams, and just ask the question, what are we experimenting with? That's a great takeaway for the conference. All right, we're running long, and so this last question, let's make it a lightning round.
Okay.
Yeah,
lightning
don't do
round.
lighting.
Don't do lightning?
Not just that one.
Have you not listened to my podcast?
I'm a pro.
I have.
I got you
All
on
right.
lightning.
Let's bring up that next question. So feedback, you talked about feedback. Feedback fuels transformation. Everybody needs feedback. None of us want it.
Right.
That is a reality, but we need it. You said don't pay as much attention to the compliment, but listen to the critics. This is difficult. Why should leaders embrace this idea?
Yeah, so Jesus says, if you're a leader, Jesus says, love your enemies. Well, one of the reasons we need to love our enemies as leaders is oftentimes they're the only person that's truthful with us. So especially, I was telling you guys, I was in a meeting with a bunch of megachurch pastors, and one of them really challenged me in the group. And that doesn't happen a lot at my level anymore. Like, I don't hear a lot like, no, you're wrong, chill out. And this is a retired megachurch pastor who really challenged me. I actually came home and I told my son, I was like, wow, now I know how you feel, because I'm just on him all the time. But he's not my enemy, but a lot of times it's only our critic that is speaking to us. And we need to listen to that and decide, what's truth and what's not truth, because even in Tammy and I's relationship, there's a cost at her criticisms. So there's an intimacy cost, there's a relational cost, there's strain on the family. And so when she's criticizing me, right, or has something to say, she has to temper that, because it can just get overwhelming where I'm like, whatever. The enemy doesn't live in our home, and so I need to invite that. And so I remember years ago, somebody called me, one of the first reviews of my sermon in the paper was, Pastor Matt Brown's a simpleton. And I'm like, I am not. And then I was like, what does that word mean? And I had to look it up. And it stuck with me forever. I need to make sure that I'm actually saying something when I'm speaking. And what I would say is, if you're not a self-critical person, a self-aware person, you desperately need someone to speak into your life. So I know when I speak and it's bad, typically. You've lived with me for 24 years. I'm constantly, this need to be better. That's not better. You and I talk about when I preach on video, nope, that's good, that's a wrap. We can move on, and you'll tell me, I don't think it can get any better than that. And just so you know, usually it doesn't. If the first one comes out golden, it's downhill from there. But the ability to stay up late at night and say on a Saturday night, hey, I preached on this controversial topic. Dan, I need you to come over because it didn't come out right. And we're going to work through that and be willing to say, I care more about the people who are hearing what I'm saying than you saying, good job, good job. I actually want it to land. And so I would just say, invite feedback. Tammy and I, we watched her talk yesterday, which was fabulous. I would encourage you to listen to it. I thought her content was great. And I said, here's my feedback. One was very simple, pacing, the speed with which you talk. When we get nervous, we talk faster, and so that's what happens. And then 2, watch your body language when you're talking, watch what you're doing. But the talk was incredible. Like, I actually thought she said some stuff that I wish was in my book. I was like, I wish you would have told me that before you gave a talk, because it was so good, and there was just so many moments. And invite feedback. A lot of times, a lot of our listeners are speakers. You can move past the Holy Spirit moment. We talk about that in worship. Like, the worship team will nail it, and then one more song. It's like, no, like, you just sent everybody out. Like, we were all ready, and then you went too much, man. You leave people wanting more and leave people excited, and look for that moment to just end with, the glorious punch and hug together. And we don't always land that way. So listen to that and ask people, and just say, listen, I want some feedback. How did you receive me? How did that talk go? What did you think about this? And what I would say is, people won't give you feedback unless you do 2 things. Number 1, you invite them to give feedback. And number 2, you don't bite their head off when they give you feedback. And so you have to actually, what I meant was, you can't do that. You have to say,
safe landing for feedback.
You have to go, okay, wow, I said that. And I mean, one of the most controversial things I've ever said on the internet, I wasn't even aware that I said it until somebody pointed it out to me on Google. And if you search my name, it's a comment that I made about a controversial issue. I know I'm not going to say it.
David's like,
yeah. But can you guys believe that? So one of the most negative things I'm known for, when people Google my name, one of the first things that came up is something I didn't know I said until an enemy pointed it out. And I was heartbroken. And I thought, good God, that's how I said it. So I need to receive feedback. And
they have nothing at stake to lose.
Yeah. And so you need to do that, and surround yourself with people that love you, that believe in you, and it's either good or it's not good. And you're only going to get better with feedback. You only get better with feedback. And I think in the church, we're just so afraid of, even this conference. Like, we're going to go back and look at it. There's some things that we need to grow on, and some things that we need to do better. The win is we rolled out a conference and we did it. It's amazing, but there's some things we need to grow about, and you and I have to have the confidence with each other to say, Dan, this needs to be improved. This area was excellent. This area is not, and it can't destroy people. Right. And you really can't, especially if you're a leader in your church, you can't have people on your team that are destroyed by feedback. It just, that doesn't work. Yeah. God bless you. We love you. You probably shouldn't be a leader. Like, if you can't take feedback, I don't know that there's a future for you in leadership. So
that's great. All right, next question. Tammy, we're gonna throw to you.
Okay.
Let's talk Enneagram. Churches, businesses that are not using the Enneagram, why should they? What are a couple of key benefits for using the Enneagram in your organization?
The number one thing I think is the leaders of whatever organization, even if you just do it as a leadership team, which is kind of how we started, is you will understand your strengths, which you can step more into them, but also your weaknesses. But another benefit of that is you understand the strengths of one another. And when the team is healthy, I don't need to be all things. I don't need to be the commanding chief officer of everything that happens, because I have my girl right here. She can do that, And Mel has me, and together we have what it takes on a team. And I think what's so crucial for organizations is to understand the strengths that everyone brings to the table. And at Sandals, that's what we're doing. We're saying, who needs to come into this conversation? We need to have so-and-so in here, because that is their gift.
That's great.
All of us don't always need to be in the same room together.
Sure. Yep.
And there's a lot of people not sitting right here who we need in the room.
Yeah.
And when you know that so well, it also gives you the starting place for these hard conversations of like, hey, when you're sideways, that you revert to this. But the last thing, and I think one of the best things that our organization has moved into, is we actually use it in a hiring system. And it gives us right away, when we have people take the assessment, it shows us right off the bat some of the beauty and the gifts and the strengths they're going to bring to the team potentially. And it shows us some potential weaknesses. Now, we know what we're looking for when we're hiring a candidate. And that right there might tell us, this position requires 1, 2, and 3. And those might be the weaknesses of this particular person. And we all know that we've actually looked at some and gone, you know what, they're not right for this, what they applied for.
Yeah.
But we know we need this.
Yeah.
And so I think organizations that use it to understand, and again, it's not looking for the weaknesses, looking for the strength and understanding you're getting a whole package when you hire somebody.
Yeah.
Do we want the whole package?
Right, yeah.
You know,
great.
and so I think in our hiring for an organization, it has been a game changer.
That's excellent. A couple things on the Enneagram before I throw it to Melody. sandalschurch.com/Enneagram for podcasts and lots of other information and tools. Our assessment is there. And then Pastor Matt has can I share?
Yeah.
Pastor Matt has a book coming out. I wasn't sure if I could share that. On the Enneagram coming next year. So look out for that.
July of 21.
Yeah.
So it's not up to me. HarperCollins said that's when it's coming
That's the date.
out.
So look for it. Melody, this is an important question. I mean that. Talk to young leaders, young female leaders especially right now that are not being encouraged to lead, that have the gifting, that have the calling. God's equipped them to lead, but they're not being encouraged to lead. I want you to speak to them for a few moments.
If you're okay, I'm going to also speak to people who have young female leaders in their midst.
Take it away.
And let me say the first thing is challenge your own intimidation factor when you have a young female leader on your team. Like, look inward at why that might not be sitting well with you before you want to talk to them about what they may or may not be doing right. You know, growing up, I have notes, and I think my mom has saved them as a part of like, look how God's brought you along, Melody. Melody's so bossy. She's bossy. She can't have friends. She's bossy. I wish someone would have said, you've got leadership skills. And you need some refinement. And if your approach, because I spent way too many years as a young pastor's wife thinking something was wrong with me, than that God had actually made me this way and wanted me to be the best version of myself that I could be. So first, to pastors and leaders who have young, strong female leaders around you, encourage them. And if that's hard for you, do some internal reflection first before you kind of make it an outward-facing thing. And because we do need to be refined. Everyone needs to be refined. But to the young female leaders, let me just kind of reinforce that God's not wasting your waiting. Don't spend time thinking what's wrong with you. Instead, I want you to really spend some time, if you're a believer, in Romans 12, 1 and 2, where we are asked to take our whole life, everything about us, and place it on the altar before God and say, here I am, here's my gifts, here's my strengths, here's my ambition, here's my desire, and I'm willing to just put all of that in front of you, God, and say, have your way with me. You know, don't be so driven to be like another strong leader that you see. We don't need another Lisa Bevere. We don't need another Tammy Brown. We don't need another Mel. We need you to be who God's made you to be. And the only way that you know that is if you are constantly deepening your relationship and connection to Him. And as He refines you and grows you, He will bring more opportunities to bear in your life. And also, just to go back to something that Matt said, we talked actually earlier this year, I have a heart for these young female leaders. I have a heart for where they're at. And he said, I want to challenge you not to remove every obstacle that they face, because those obstacles that I faced have brought me here.
So good.
And so, walk through the obstacles, persevere, push through, don't give up, but don't also look to have every hardship removed, because those hardships are what God is using you to make you into the leader He's created you to be. You have to go through those things to get to that next level of leadership.
Love it. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to close, Brian, calling this question the Hail Mary pivot. Many organizations are struggling right now. Speak to those that are leading churches and businesses that are struggling. What kind of pivots should they be thinking about right now?
Sure, I mean, we can talk a lot about tactics and strategies, but I actually think if you're struggling, the number one pivot you should consider is probably not a pivot forward, but a pivot back to your calling. A pivot back to maybe your original assignment. You know, whether in the marketplace or the church, we've got this dynamic called the paradox of success, where, you achieve a little bit, and then all of a sudden you've got opportunities and options, and you start acting on those. Before too long, you've kind of cluttered your vision, you've diluted it a little bit. I mean, we even see this with Moses' transition to Joshua. Joshua pivoted back to the assignment of the king. As soon as he did that, you know, they repented through circumcision. They began to operate from the strength of the fruit of the land again. No more manna, no more wandering. He pivoted them back to their original assignment. And I think when we're struggling, sometimes maybe our best pivot forward is actually a pivot back to our calling.
That's great.
You know, one of the hardest things we do as leaders is to see past our own desires and interests to see the assignment of God. You know, I think a week or two ago, Pastor Matt, you even said in your sermon, are you going to be obedient to God or obedient to your desires? And when we struggle, sometimes it might be that we have wrapped God's assignment in too many of our own desires. And when we pivot back to the assignment of God, it can really, I think it can really galvanize and inspire the team. It's like, yes, this is why we exist. We exist to reach lost people. Yes. And I think it can also, you know, it kind of lets the air out of the room for the leader. Hey, we don't have to do all these things. I don't have to be all things to all people. I don't have to save the world. We can actually come back to this assignment. So I'd say if you're struggling, maybe a pivot back to your calling might be the thing you need. And when you do, you might just find that the commander of the army of the Lord joins you.
There we go.
And that struggle becomes just a bit easier because now you're working in alignment with the assignment of God.
It's good.
So good. Man, way to close us out. Thank you, Brian. That's just phenomenal. Hey, look, I want to thank you and really thank each of you guys, our panel, for being a part of the conference, for sharing your experience and wisdom. My hope is that God will use something that was shared from our panel today to really transform your leadership. We created the conference to help you become a more agile leader. Look, the world is changing faster than ever before, and we wanted to equip you to lead change and not be led by it. All right, I'd like to invite you into a couple of next steps as we close things out. Here's the first one. I want to encourage you to take a next step in your leadership development and sign up for Rogo School. It's for everybody. We've made it free. It starts in January. It's online. And so I want you to consider your leadership development growth by stepping into Rogo School. That's number one. A second next step is to give to the Rogo Foundation. Look, if you want to help save dying churches, and right now there are thousands of churches around our country that are getting ready to close their doors, and the foundation helps to revive and replant churches. So if you're watching this and God has blessed you, we want to encourage you to make a gift. And there may be someone watching who wants to give a really big gift to the foundation. And if that's the case, reach out to Pastor Matt and I. We would love to talk to you. The third thing is just to share the Rogo Foundation documentary. It tells the story of saving 2 dying churches and helping to replant them. So please go out and share the documentary with others. You can find these next steps at sandalschurch.com/leadership. All right. I want to send it over to our hosts with the most, Jeff and Christina. Will you close us out?
Well, that is a wrap. I feel full of leadership. My cup runneth over.
So great, so great.
We will have the recorded conference and all of our One Talks available for you to watch on YouTube and at sandalschurch.com/leadership conference.
Yeah, on behalf of Jeff, Sandals Church, the Rogo Foundation, and all of our speakers and sponsors, we want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Take care.